My name is Helena, and when the narrative I'm about to share commenced, I was merely 10 years old. From my earliest years, the pall of paternal disapproval hung over me, as opaque as gathering storm clouds. My father, a man of few words but whose glances carried immense weight, never truly saw me. To him, I was merely the middle daughter, the one whose aspirations were deemed too lofty for a girl. I distinctly remember the occasions when my brothers received commendation for every minor achievement, whereas my own endeavors, my aviation sketches, or my impeccable academic performance, were met with pervasive indifference or, even worse, with disparaging comparisons. "Your brothers are more pragmatic, Helena," he would assert, "or this notion of flight is not for you. Girl, it's a man's world." The phrase, "it's not for you," reverberated through my mind like an unseen manacle, a ponderous chain striving to tether me to the ground. Yet, remarkably, instead of crushing my spirit, it ignited an unyielding flame within me. My paramount aspiration, for as long as I can remember, was to take to the skies with the U.S. Air Force. I envisioned myself aloft, free, powerful, and shattering every conceivable barrier. The roar of jets rending the atmosphere was my most cherished symphony. Nevertheless, my father's strong disapprobation, who perceived my ambition as being constrained by my gender, stood as a constant, unyielding barrier. He found it inconceivable for a woman to thrive in such a masculine domain, and his skepticism weighed heavily upon me. Still, I would not yield. If he couldn't perceive me soaring, I would forge an alternative path to the heavens. It was then that I plunged headlong into aeronautical engineering. It was not the trajectory I had initially envisioned. Yet it was a pathway to the identical destination, the realm of aviation. Each volume, every intricate calculation, every meticulously crafted design, represented a stride away from his pervasive shadow, a foundational brick in the edifice of my nascent identity. I sought to vindicate myself to him, certainly, yet, preeminently, I yearned to prove to myself that I was indeed capable, that my inherent worth was not contingent upon his validation. The sting of his disparaging remarks transmuted into an indomitable fuel, an unrelenting energy to surmount every formidable impediment. The quest for this personal redemption became the driving force of my life. I needed to break free from the sense of inadequacy he had instilled in me. Each day, I strove to be better, not to earn his love or recognition, but to forge the woman I knew I could become. The idea of forgiving him seemed remote in those years, almost impossible. How could I forgive someone who consistently belittled me? But deep down, I knew that true freedom would come not merely by stepping out of his shadow, but by finding peace within myself, accepting my past and, eventually, forgiving not only him, but also myself for having carried that burden for so long. This journey of self-discovery and overcoming was only just commencing. Even in my adolescence, I realized that true rebellion would not manifest through shouts or confrontations, but rather through the quietude of my unwavering dedication. I delved into my studies with an intensity verging on obsession. Every physics textbook, every intricate equation, every engineering project was an act of defiance, a testament to the fact that I was more than the confined vision my father held of me. All-nighters became the norm. Caffeine, my constant companion. I recall a high school calculus teacher, Mr. Davies, who was the first to truly perceive me. He recognized my passion and aptitude, and his subtle encouragements a commendation. Here, a word of encouragement, there, were like small rays of sunshine on overcast days. He would tell me that the sky was the limit for those who dared to dream big, and his words fortified my resolve to persevere. Even as my father's voice still reverberated in my mind, my aeronautical engineering studies were nothing short of a battlefield. Beyond the inherent complexity of the coursework, there was the incessant pressure to prove my mettle in a predominantly male milieu. Indeed, moments of profound failure were not uncommon. An aerodynamics project that failed to perform as anticipated, or a dishearteningly low score on a thermodynamics exam, would often lead me to question my entire path. I recall one particular instance, utterly depleted and disheartened, when I nearly succumbed to the urge to quit. I telephoned my mother, who with her characteristically calm yet resolute voice, uttered, "Helena, you have always possessed an unparalleled determination. Channel this adversity to propel yourself forward, rather than allowing it to drag you down." Those words, emanating from someone who had always preferred to remain in the background, proved to be a profound watershed moment. I came to discern that setbacks were not terminal, but rather indispensable stepping stones towards personal evolution. From then on, I began to perceive every formidable challenge as a fertile ground for learning and an avenue for cultivating greater resilience. Gradually, I began to sense an internal shift. The respect I had sought from my father started to emanate from other sources, from my professors, who afforded me research opportunities, from my colleagues, who sought me out to discuss intricate projects, and, most importantly, from within myself. The Helena beholden to paternal approval was giving way to a confident woman, one who trusted in her own capabilities. I was no longer pursuing his recognition as the sole metric of my success. My own validation became the lodestar for everything. I was forging my own identity, paving my own path, and the sky, once a distant dream, now appeared an attainable destination. I was emancipating myself from the invisible shackles, one step at a time. Years later, with my career firmly established, life presented me with a pivotal juncture that would fundamentally redefine everything. One day, I received a cryptic phone call, an invitation to a clandestine meeting. The U.S. Air Force was summoning me. It wasn't to pilot, as I had dreamed in my youth, but for something even more audacious, to lead the development of the next generation of the iconic B-2, the aerial crown jewel. Destiny had a plan far grander than I had ever imagined. It was a singular opportunity, yet it came with an unwavering commitment to absolute confidentiality. One that would further estrange me from my family and which, I knew, my father would never truly comprehend. The decision was far from simple. It meant immersing myself in a clandestine world of colossal pressures, and once again, defying expectations. But at that juncture, it was no longer about proving anything to him. It was about me, about the ardent passion within my soul, about the profound desire to shape the future of aviation. It was a decision that would lead me down a path of redemption, not merely for myself, but, in a way, I could not yet fathom. Also, for the intricate relationship with my father. I accepted. My name is Helena. And for a long time, the phrase, "it's not for you," wasn't merely the reverberation of my father's words. It transformed into an internalized voice, an insidious whisper that questioned every step, every aspiration. I grew up under the shadow of paternal disapproval, a silent yet crushing presence that led me to doubt everything about myself. I saw myself as a leaf adrift on the wind, devoid of firm roots, perpetually seeking the validation that perpetually eluded me. I recall nights when, following a day of intense study, I would find myself before the mirror, questioning whether my dreams were truly my own or merely a desperate attempt to fill a void, to prove something to a man who never truly saw me. This pervasive doubt gnawed at my self-esteem, leading me to feel that, perhaps, he had been right, perhaps I was not capable, perhaps my place was elsewhere, smaller, safer, far from the skies I so yearned to reach. During one of those introspective moments, an unforeseen opportunity materialized, like a beacon in the mist. An aerospace engineering internship program, offered by one of the nation's most renowned universities, appeared on my radar. This was no mere internship. It was a tangible opportunity to immerse myself in the very heart of aviation, to work on projects that had previously existed only within the confines of my sketchbooks. The prospect of participating in something so monumental ignited a spark within me. A sense that a viable path might exist for me, a place where my potential would not merely be acknowledged, but cultivated. It wasn't about piloting, but about building, about innovating, about being part of the genesis of something that would defy gravity. This was my chance to prove my worth, to affirm that my aspirations were not merely childish fantasies. With my heart in my hand and a courage I hadn't even known I possessed, I decided to take the first step. I completed the application, submitted my resume, and to my surprise, was accepted for an interview. The news filled me with a quiet elation, but soon the anxiety of having to share it with my father set in. I mustered all my strength and, during a tense dinner, mentioned the internship, the opportunity to finally forge my own path. His reaction was exactly as I had feared. The initial silence hung heavy, followed by a deep sigh and that disapproving gaze I knew so well. "Helena, you know this isn't for you," he said, his voice grave. "It's a very competitive, very male-dominated environment. You should think about something more, stable, more suitable." He tried to convince me that I wasn't suited for it, that I would encounter difficulties a woman couldn't overcome, and that I should give up before I became frustrated. His words, though anticipated, landed like a gut punch. The invisible shackles cinched tighter once more, and for a fleeting moment, I felt myself recoil. Doubt flooding back with full force. Yet something within me had shifted. The spark ignited, by opportunity had not dimmed. I could still feel the sting of his disapprobation, but also a burgeoning resolve. I no longer wished to be the daughter who cowered beneath his shadow. I wanted to be Helena, the woman who dared to dream and fight for her aspirations, even if it meant forging my path alone, bereft of his support. In that instant, I resolved that, for the first time, I would make a choice for myself, not to appease him or to avert his displeasure. The journey would be arduous, I knew, but the liberation awaiting me on the other side was worth every impediment. Notwithstanding the oppressive weight of my father's pronouncements, acceptance into the university's internship program felt like a much-needed breath of fresh air, a tangible assurance that a niche might indeed exist for me in the world. A sanctuary where my aspirations would remain unclipped. The campus was sprawling, its edifices formidable, and I felt like a minuscule component within a vast, intricate puzzle, yet, for the very first time, one that cohered perfectly. On my inaugural day, as I endeavored to locate the aerodynamics laboratory, I found myself disoriented amidst corridors that resembled concrete and glass labyrinths. It was then that I inadvertently encountered a man with distinguished gray hair and keen, inquisitive eyes, who was laden with a formidable stack of books and project schematics. He promptly introduced himself as Professor Mendez, and a warm, inviting smile instantly dispelled the prevailing formality of the encounter. He was, in fact, the coordinator of the very laboratory where I was slated to intern, and his very presence exuded a profound sense of calm that instantly assuaged my trepidation. Sensing my apprehension and evident disorientation, he invited me for a coffee before escorting me to the laboratory. During that unhurried conversation, he inquired about my interests, my dreams, a rarity at home, where my aspirations were often dismissed as mere whims. Tentatively, I began to speak about my passion for aviation, how I had sketched prototypes since childhood, and even my initial aspiration to fly, which had been realigned toward engineering. As I spoke, he did not interrupt with skepticism or disapproval. Instead, his eyes gleamed with genuine interest, and he truly listened, offering a rapt attention I was unaccustomed to receiving. Upon my completion, he smiled and said, "Helena, the heavens know no gender. What truly matters is your unwavering passion and dedication. I discern within you a certain luminescence, an insatiable curiosity that is pivotal for groundbreaking innovation. Do not permit the circumscribed perspectives of others to dictate the scope of your potential." Those words served as a profound anodyne for my spirit, a solace whose profound necessity I had previously been unaware of. He recounted the myriad challenges he had personally encountered during the nascent stages of his own career, and underscored how unwavering persistence is the quintessential key to surmounting impediments. For the very first time, beyond the confines of my immediate familial circle, I encountered an individual who not only reposed faith in me but overtly championed my aspirations, perceiving me as an equal, a prospective peer, rather than merely just a girl burdened with unsuitable ambitions. Professor Mendez transcended the role of a mere internship coordinator. He was, in fact, my mentor. He guided me through projects, challenged me to think beyond conventional frameworks, and consistently underscored the immense value of my unique perspective. Through his tutelage, I grasped that external voices, however commanding they might appear, need not dictate our trajectory. The flame of hope, initially kindled by the internship acceptance, now blazed with an unprecedented intensity. I felt esteemed, competent, and every day spent in the laboratory was a profound personal triumph. The recurring phrase, "It's not for you," still occasionally surfaced in my thoughts. Yet now, I possessed a definitive rejoinder, one that resonated with Professor Mendez's wisdom and propelled me forward. Yes, it absolutely is for me, and I will unequivocally prove it. This external validation proved pivotal in enabling me to persistently forge my own path, one brick at a time, toward the lofty aspirations that beckoned my internship. Under Professor Mendez's tutelage was a whirlwind of learning and challenges. I poured myself body and soul into the projects, experiencing a gratification I had never known before. I distinctly recall one particular project, the development of a novel control system for a high-altitude drone prototype. It was intricate, demanding precise calculations and a profound grasp of aerodynamics and electronics. I spent weeks engrossed in diagrams, code, and simulations, convinced I was on the right track. Professor Mendez lauded my dedication, yet I felt the relentless pressure of self-imposed demands, the imperative to prove myself worthy of that opportunity. The prototype's first test phase commenced, and anxiety consumed me. That morning, as I adjusted the final parameters, my father's voice echoed in my mind. "It's not for you. It's too difficult a world for a woman." I tried to dismiss the thought, but it clung, subtle and corrosive. The drone was launched, and for a few minutes, everything seemed perfect. It ascended, stabilized, and I felt immense relief. But then, without warning, the control system failed. The prototype plummeted, shattering into pieces on the test field. The sight of my labor and dedication being utterly destroyed was a crushing blow. I felt a lump in my throat, my eyes welling up. Failure was palpable, and my father's voice now screamed in my head, "I knew it. You're not good enough." That day proved to be one of the most trying of my life. I retreated to my dorm room and collapsed into tears. The frustration was immense, the shame even more profound. I felt diminished, utterly worthless, precisely as he had always made me perceive myself. I contemplated giving up, abandoning everything, and returning home, to the presumed security of a life devoid of ambitions he would deem appropriate. Yet, amidst that profound despair, something distinct began to surface. I recalled Professor Mendes's words, "What truly matters is your passion, and your dedication," and that passion, indeed, still resided there, beneath the drone's wreckage. By degrees, the ire stemming from the setback ceded to curiosity. Why had it failed? Where had I erred? I commenced scrutinizing the data, dissecting every line of code, every calculation. I discerned a subtle flaw, a logical oversight within an algorithm that I had neglected due to an excess of confidence. It wasn't attributable to my gender, nor to any inherent incapacity, but rather to a technical oversight that any engineer, regardless of gender, could commit. That epiphany was profoundly emancipating. My failure wasn't because it wasn't meant for me, rather, it stemmed from my inherent humanity, where error is an intrinsic part of the learning process. The following day, I sought out Professor Mendes, not to offer an apology, but to present my comprehensive analysis of the mistake and the solutions I had already begun to develop. He listened with rapt attention, and a discernible proud smile spread across his face. "This, Helena," he stated, "is precisely what we term resilience. Failure is not an ultimate conclusion. It is, rather, the preliminary sketch of a nascent beginning." In that pivotal moment, I finally grasped that genuine triumph lay not in circumventing a fall, but in the inherent capacity to rise, assimilate the lessons, and forge resolutely onward. The lingering echo of my father's voice still whispered, yet now I possessed my own voice, strong enough to overshadow Ida's voice that resounded with, "I am capable. I shall endeavor once more." And I did try, persisting in my efforts. Each perceived failure serving only to fortify me further. Notwithstanding Professor Mendes's invaluable support and my burgeoning resilience, my father's voice still found crevices to permeate my consciousness. It was akin to a parasite, draining my vitality and sowing seeds of doubt. I felt ensnared in a vicious cycle, with each achievement, the anticipation that he would finally acknowledge me, followed by the inevitable disillusionment of his indifference or disapproval. This relentless pursuit of validation exhausted me, preventing me from fully savoring my triumphs. I longed to be Helena, the passionate engineer. Yet it seemed a part of me remained the little girl, who simply yearned for her father's proud gaze. With every phone call home, every visit, the tension mounted, and I felt I was on the verge of either imploding or, worse, withering away entirely. The breaking point came during one of my rare visits to the family home. Over the Thanksgiving holiday, I had just delivered a complex research project at my internship, which garnered significant accolades from the entire team, including Professor Mendes. Brimming with naive hope, I shared the news at the dinner table. My siblings and mother congratulated me, but my father, true to form, remained silent, merely pushing the food around on his plate. After a long moment, he finally raised his eyes to me, and with a tone of voice that mingled boredom and disdain, said, "Helena, don't you think it's time to start thinking about something more, concrete? This engineering path is highly uncertain. Your cousin Jonah just got engaged and is set to open a flower shop. Now that's a life for a woman." In that instant, something within me fractured, though not in the manner I had anticipated. It was not a collapse into sorrow or fury, but rather a fissure that allowed light to penetrate. I looked at him, no longer with the plea of moments prior, but with a startling clarity that took me by surprise. It wasn't about me. It was about him, about the fears and ingrained prejudices that held him captive. His circumscribed perspective did not define who I was, nor who I was destined to become. In that very moment, amidst the subdued clatter of silverware and the murmur of peripheral conversations, I made a silent yet profound decision. I was divorcing myself from the very need for his approbation. I no longer required his sanction to merely exist, let alone to truly flourish. A wave of relief swept through my body, as if an invisible weight, borne for years, had finally been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free, in complete command of my destiny. My breath grew lighter, my horizons expanded. The dismissive "it's not for you" that had once crippled me now resonated as an impetus. A challenge I was more than ready to embrace. From that day forward, my quest for fulfillment would no longer be an attempt to prove something to him, but a journey to honor the woman I was becoming, a woman who dared to dream big and fight for her own skies. And with this newfound freedom, I returned to university with renewed passion and determination, ready to embrace the future I would build for myself. Following Thanksgiving, and the clarity that conversation with my father afforded me, I felt a compelling need to redefine our relationship. It was no longer about seeking his approval, but about establishing a dynamic of mutual respect, of authenticity. I knew it would be difficult, perhaps the most arduous conversation of my life. But it was an essential step towards my own liberation. I waited a few weeks, until the intensity of the holiday emotions had subsided. And then, on a sun-drenched Saturday, I decided to visit him. I found him in the backyard, pruning the rose bushes, one of his few discernible passions. The scent of damp earth and freshly cut blooms permeated the air, creating an atmosphere of calm that I hoped would aid us. I drew closer, and he lifted his gaze, taken aback by my unannounced visit. "Helena, this is quite a surprise," he uttered, in that familiar neutral tone of his. "Is everything all right?" I drew a deep breath, my heart quickening in my chest. "Yes, Father, all is well. In fact, I needed to discuss something significant with you." He set down his pruning shears, a clear indication that he might be receptive to what I had to say. We settled onto a garden bench, the quiet punctuated only by birdsong. "Father," I commenced, my voice slightly trembling, yet resolute, "I am aware you've always desired what's best for me, in your own fashion. But I need you to comprehend the profound effect some of your words have had on me." He tensed, his shoulders stiffening. "What words, Helena?" "I always tried to protect you." I nodded, carefully choosing my words so he wouldn't feel attacked. "When I was a child, and even later, whenever I spoke of my dreams of flying, of working with aircraft, you'd say it wasn't for me, that it was a man's thing. Those words, Dad, were like invisible shackles. They made me doubt myself for years, made me feel inadequate, that my dreams were wrong. I'm not blaming you, but I want you to understand how I felt, and how it shaped my journey." He looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something that seemed like surprise, perhaps even pain, in his eyes. The silence hung heavy and dense. He averted his gaze, fixing it on a distant rosebush. I merely wished for you to have an easier life, Helena. This world is unforgiving. I never intended for you to suffer." His voice was hushed, almost a whisper, and for the first time, it didn't bear the usual defensive edge, but rather weariness. "I know, Dad," I replied, my voice softening slightly. "Yet the life I've chosen, even amidst its challenges, is the one that brings me happiness, and I simply wished for you to recognize that, and for me to have your support, not because I require it to forge ahead, but because you are my father." The tension still lingered, palpable, yet there was a glimmer, a small opening. He offered no apology, nor did he articulate full comprehension, but his silence alone constituted a different response. A tacit acknowledgement that reality diverged from his preconceptions. It marked a beginning, an imperfect understanding, yet a tangible step forward in our intricate narrative. The 5 years following my covert induction into the U.S. Air Force were a maelstrom of unwavering commitment and utmost discretion. Spearheading the development of the next generation iconic B-2 was not merely a job, it was the embodiment of every childhood dream, of every surreptitious sketch. I inhabited a world of veiled hangars, amidst the low thrum of advanced computing systems and the metallic scent of nascent alloys. My team, an elite cadre of brilliant minds, reposed their trust in my leadership, and each day served as an affirmation that I was precisely where I was meant to be. The exigencies were immense. The project, of paramount strategic importance to the nation, demanded the utmost from each of us. Nevertheless, the profound sense of belonging and purpose I discovered in this endeavor imbued me with an unyielding resolve. The culmination of all this effort was slated. The final presentation to the U.S. President and the senior military leadership. It was the moment to unveil the aircraft we had meticulously forged, the aerial crown jewel poised to redefine military operations. In the days preceding the presentation, a palpable tension permeated the atmosphere. I meticulously rehearsed every word, scrutinized every graphic, acutely aware of the immense responsibility resting on my shoulders. The night before, as I lay in bed, the room's silence was punctuated only by the frantic pounding of my heart. It was then that, unbidden, my father's voice resurfaced in my mind, sharp and incisive as never before. "It's not for you. It's a man's world. You won't be able to withstand the pressure." The words reverberated, and for an instant, I felt the familiar invisible manacle constrict, endeavoring to drag me back into a vortex of self-doubt and apprehension. A surge of dread engulfed me. What if he was right? What if, at the pivotal moment, I faltered? Cold sweat beaded on my brow. But suddenly, another voice, more potent and unequivocal, emerged from within me. It was my own voice, tempered by years of resilience, forged in countless nights of toil, every misstep transmuted into wisdom. I rose, walked to the window, and gazed upon the starlit expanse. It wasn't the heavens I aspired to navigate, but it was the firmament I was contributing to sculpt. I was not there by mere happenstance, nor for the imprimatur of others. I was there by dint of merit, by profound passion, through a sheer dedication that surpassed all conceivable expectations, including my own. That morning, upon entering the conference room, brimming with generals and high-ranking officials, my body trembled, yet my mind was at peace. I took a deep breath, and as the president motioned for me to commence, the words flowed with a clarity and conviction that even surprised me. I was no longer attempting to prove anything to anyone, much less to my father. I was simply presenting the culmination of my life's work, the embodiment of my passion and expertise. Every slide, every technical explanation, was a testament to the woman I had become. The voice that once whispered "it's not for you" had been utterly silenced by the roar of my own inner strength. I was Helena, the engineer, the leader, and this was my moment, meticulously crafted by me. For me, the presentation was a resounding success, and the sense of triumph that enveloped me was not one of mere relief, but of profound and unshakable I finally felt complete. Without the need for any external validation to define my worth, the presentation to the U.S. President was a whirlwind of emotions, a professional pinnacle that transcended all expectations. At the conclusion of my address, the silence in the room was shattered by effusive applause, and I observed smiles and nods from all present. The president, with a gleam in his eye, approached to shake my hand, and his words of recognition were a balm for the soul. In that moment, the voice of my father no longer held sway, nor was there any room for lingering doubt. I had delivered my utmost, and the result was there, palpable. The sensation of triumph was overwhelming, but what filled me most was the certainty that this success was unequivocally mine, built by me, independent of anyone's validation. It was the purest form of validation, the kind that emanated from within. A few days later, the Air Force bestowed upon me a $50,000 bonus, a tangible acknowledgement of my arduous work. But, believe me, the money, substantial though it was, wasn't the true victory. It materialized in a far more unexpected and profound manner. One rainy afternoon, as I was deeply engrossed in my thoughts, the phone rang. It was my father. His voice, typically so guarded, sounded hesitant. "Helena," he began, I saw the news. About the project. The new B-2. My heart clenched, bracing for the usual indifference or some disparaging remark. But what followed utterly astonished me. He paused, and I could hear his labored breathing from the other end of the line. I don't know what to say. It's monumental. You've accomplished something I could never have conceived. I'm so sorry, Helena." That final phrase, "I'm so sorry," was barely a whisper, choked with an emotion I had never before witnessed in him. My eyes welled up. It wasn't the validation I had sought for so many years, but the acknowledgement of a truth that transcended words. For the first time, he was truly seeing the woman I had become, not the girl he had tried to protect or mold. At that very instant, the invisible fetter that had bound me shattered entirely. It wasn't because he had finally granted me his absolution, but rather because I had come to realize that I no longer needed his forgiveness to feel whole. That gaze, moist with pride, his voice thick with emotion, the heartfelt absolution. He whispered these were not intended to confer value upon me, but to acknowledge the intrinsic worth I had always possessed, and which I had, at long last, claimed for myself. I already knew my true self, and his confirmation was merely an echo, a beautiful, albeit belated, echo of my own profound certainty. That moment did not define me. Instead, it served to complete the narrative of my emergence. I was no longer the Helena defined by a quest for validation. I was Helena, the woman who had transcended all expectations, even her own, and who, at last, felt at peace with her own narrative. The presentation to the U.S. president was a maelstrom of emotions, a professional zenith that transcended all expectations. At the conclusion of my address, the prevailing silence in the room was shattered by resounding applause, and I witnessed smiles and affirmative nods from all present. The president, with a discernible gleam in his eyes, approached to shake my hand, and his words of recognition were a balm for the soul. In that moment, there was no longer any room for the echoes of my father's voice, nor for any lingering shadow of doubt. I had delivered my utmost, and the outcome was manifest and tangible. The sense of triumph was overwhelming, but what resonated most profoundly was the certitude that this success was intrinsically mine. Forged by my own efforts, independent of any external approbation, it was the purest form of validation, one that stemmed from within. Days later, the Air Force awarded me a $50,000 bonus, a tangible recognition of my arduous efforts. But believe me, the money, however substantial, was not the real triumph. It materialized in a far more unexpected and profound manner. On a rainy afternoon, while I was engrossed in contemplation, the phone rang. It was my father. His typically reserved voice seemed hesitant. "Helena," he began. I saw the news about the project, the new B-2. My heart constricted, anticipating his customary indifference or a derogatory remark. But what transpired next astounded me. He paused, and I could discern his labored breathing on the other end of the line. I don't know what to say. It's monumental. You've accomplished something I had never imagined. I'm so sorry, Helena." The last sentence, "I'm so sorry," was almost a whisper, choked by an emotion I had never before encountered in him. My eyes welled up. It wasn't the affirmation I had yearned for throughout the years, but the acknowledgement of a truth that surpassed mere words. He was, for the first time, truly perceiving the woman I had evolved into, rather than the girl he had striven to protect or shaped. At that very instant, the intangible fetter that had bound me utterly dissolved. Not because he had finally granted me his forgiveness, but rather because I apprehended that I no longer required his absolution to feel whole. That gaze misted with pride, his voice thick with emotion. The poignant absolution, he murmured, were not meant to confer worth upon me, but rather to acknowledge the inherent worth I had always possessed, and which I had at long last reclaimed. For myself, I already knew my true self, and his affirmation was merely an echo, a beautiful, albeit belated, echo, of my own conviction. That moment did not define me, but rather brought my self-realization to completion. I was no longer the Helena who constantly sought external validation. I was Helena, the woman who had transcended all expectations, including her own, and who, at long last, felt at peace with her own narrative. Our relationship did not transmute into a fairy tale of instantaneous proximity. The years of emotional chasm and the invisible scars persisted, an indelible part of our narrative. Yet, the pervasive tension that had once suffocated us gradually dissipated. He, in his characteristically reticent manner, began to accord me a deference he had never previously evinced, and I, reciprocally, was able to perceive him no longer as the father who invariably invalidated me, but rather as a man grappling with his own intrinsic limitations and fears. Crucially, however, the paramount act was the absolution the first granted myself. I forgave myself for having borne the onus of his pronouncements for an inordinate duration, for having permitted his circumscribed perspective to unilaterally define my self-perception. The profound tranquility I discovered emanated not from any transformation within him, but from an internal metamorphosis within myself. From the unshakable conviction that my inherent worth was intrinsic, impervious to any external appraisal. I had, at last, truly ascertained my rightful place in the world, a sanctuary meticulously constructed through my own volition and inherent resilience. The future unfolded, boundless and auspicious, unburdened by the lingering specters of the past, and I stood poised to embrace it, finally unfettered, ready to soar.